Today, I wanted to start the conversation on something you recently spoke about on your social media, which was gaslighting. Now, this is a term I often get confused with because I feel like it means something, but I always have a hard time trying to pin exactly what it means. What is gaslighting?
I think that the meaning has gotten a little bit diffused lately. As I wrote on my website there, it comes from this movie decades ago where some guy was messing with his wife by, turning up and down the gas lights and pretending nothing was wrong. And she'd say, "Is something wrong with the lights?" And he'd be like, "No, I don't notice anything." So he was really messing with her in that way. So it's when somebody does something that is difficult, obnoxious, aggressive, but then turns it around on you, like you're the one causing the problem. And you see this in dysfunctional relationships a lot, but even in generally good relationships, people can get defensive and turn it around. You show up late home from some event or something, and your partner is upset or just mildly annoyed even. And they say, "Well, where were you?" It's like, "Well, if you were this, if I'm really working really hard," and they start, turning it back on you as if you're the one who's done something or has caused the problem. That's what we call gaslighting. And it definitely is not a helpful relationship behavior. It can cause a lot of trouble.
Got it. So, basically it's when people they may be at fault or they're likely at fault, and then they turn it around. They don't want to take the ownership of what's happened, and that's the gaslighting. Am I right?
But
Did I
I
get
would
that
say
right?
that it's actually when they are certainly at fault, right?
Okay, they're
Gaslighting,
certainly at fault.
yeah, because if we're arguing about who did something wrong, that seems like a normal argument. That is, maybe I'm being defensive, but gaslighting is where I did something to you and then I'm blaming you for it,
Got it. Okay.
right? That is
Okay.
very
That's
confusing. It messes with people's minds, and it can go pretty far from just saying, "Well, that's your fault," to really doing these crazy psychological things like the guy in the movie, or like I wrote in this post that I had this client who would deliberately take his wife's keys and hide them, and he would criticize her for being scattered and unfocused and couldn't keep track of things. So she was looking for her keys. He took them, and she was looking all over, and then she's losing her mind. So he puts the keys right back in the middle of the kitchen counter and says, "Well, here they are." Oh, gee.
yeah.
And she's like, I'm sure I looked there." "Well, honey, I guess you just have to be more careful." And he, he really messed with her head.
It's interesting. What lies underneath? Because I've noticed this, especially in certain generations, it's a little more, or certain areas, certain spaces, it comes out a little more. What's underneath it?
I think that people who don't want to take responsibility for their actions find it easier to put it on someone else. And we can all recognize that. Nobody wants to admit, "Yeah, I messed this up," or, "I'm the one causing trouble in this relationship." But at the heart of people who use this kind of tactic, people who don't want to accept responsibility, who want to control other people as a way of managing difficult situations, right? In a relationship, things go well if you look at your own stuff and deal with your own stuff instead of pointing fingers. But a lot of people don't want to do that, and that's kind of what comes up in abuse, is that people are trying to control their partners so that they don't have to deal with their own stuff.
Interesting. So it's a defense mechanism where they're really trying to avoid looking at what's in the mirror.
Yeah, in part it's that. In part it's defense. In part it's also offense. Like, I want to keep you on your back foot so that I don't have to worry about stuff. I'm going to make it all your fault. I'm perfect. I'm not going to deal with that. So in part it's a defense mechanism, and in part it's precluding ever getting to that point where I have to defend myself because, hey, I'm always right, and it's your problem, and you're the one who's wrong.
Hmm. I've never heard it in that context where it's like it's an offense mechanism. That's actually something new for the first time I've heard. I've usually heard about defense mechanism. Offense mechanism is very intriguing.
I mean, I think it comes down to the same thing. There
Yeah.
are a few people who are really interested in causing pain to other people, right? There are sociopaths out there that's kind of their thing. I like, hurting other people, and I have no empathy, and that's the way it is. Most people are not like that, but they use that approach, yeah, to block off ultimately it's a defense against having to deal with their problems and their mistakes. And as long as I keep you on your back foot, then I'm always one step ahead. That means I don't have to deal with that. And I don't have to worry about changing myself, and I don't have to worry about being wrong. And I can just control how things are, and you'll do things the way I want them. And again, definitely does not make for a good relationship.
What do you do when you're on the other side of such a relationship? One option is definitely to just try and get out of there. But if you're someone where it's not completely dysfunctional, it's not extreme. So there is a possibility where it seems like, okay, things can come back to normal. How do you communicate this to your partner that this is what's happening?
Yeah, that's tough. Let's imagine, right, that it's just something that comes up from time to time. It's not a consistent behavior. There's not ongoing mental, physical, or psychological, emotional abuse. Okay, so maybe there's hope here for this relationship. I think starting from talking about myself is the best way to get you to hear me. If I say to you, you're doing this and that, you're gaslighting me, you're being abusive, you're not going to listen. You're already thinking about all the reasons that I'm wrong. But if I talk to you from my own perspective and say, hey, here's what's bothering me. I don't like this. Sometimes you talk to me. The other night, you came in and you seemed very angry. And then somehow I was at fault all of a sudden. And it just feels really lousy. And I kind of feel worried and unsafe in this relationship. And so I'm talking about me and my story. I'm not trying to tell you what you're doing. I'm trying to get you to understand me. If I can invite you to understand what it's like for me, we can connect and try to make a difference in that. If I'm trying to get you to agree that you've done something wrong, it's going to be a much bigger fight than a conversation about me and how I'm feeling.
So this person starts off with talking about how they're feeling, what they're going through in this situation. And that's the starting point. But I assume that at some point this person wants to get this spouse who is gaslighting to understand what's going on. How do they go from talking about themselves to communicating about or helping the other person realize what's going on? Because it could be that, this person just listens. He's like, okay, you're going through something. There's no fault of mine. How does that bridge happen?
So I have a whole process where I talk
Okay.
about exactly this, right? What are we supposed to do? So the first step is me as the speaker. I'm going to talk about myself and my experience. And you as the listener have a job of hearing me out. You're going to listen to me, right? You're going to reflect what I'm saying back in your own words. So you say, okay, Raffi, so you're feeling this, that, and the other. You're upset about what I said. I get that. That doesn't mean I agree with your perspective, but I get what you said. I understand why you feel that way. And then I'll validate that. And I say, yeah, you know what? That makes sense. That makes sense that you would feel that way. I think anybody would feel that way in that circumstance. That's validation. And then empathy. God, it really stinks that you're in that situation. I'm so sorry you feel that way. Right? So if I, as the listener, am going through that process, which, by the way, is the best acronym ever. It's LOVE, love. See how that works? Listen, reflect in your own words, validate, empathize, right? Best acronym ever. Okay. So it's easy to remember, but it's harder to practice. You practice that out, and what happens is now we're connected over that, right? If I really hear how you're suffering, and I really care that you don't like being spoken to in this way, or you wish I would call when I'm late, or whatever behavior I did that hurt you, if I really hear it and I really care about it, change is likely to happen. Much more so than if I tell you, I don't like what you're doing, you need to change it. If I say, I'm hurting because of this, and you say, wow, that really does hurt you, I get that. But then, of course, I get to say my piece. If I don't, I can relate and empathize to what you're saying, but then I'll say, you know what, I get how you feel. Can I sort of share where I'm coming from? Okay, sure, great. So, when I come home and you have this very, unpleasant look on your face, I worry that I've done something wrong, and so automatically I'm in a bad mood. So there's really two perspectives to every event. And I cannot tell you the number of times I have tried to tell my wife something that bothered me, and I was dead sure that I was right and she was wrong. And then, after I heard her perspective on it, I was like, you know what, that does make sense. So nobody's right and nobody's wrong. We both have a perspective on it. We both want to make it better. And so change is likely to happen. And if I need something specific, I'll tell you at that point, you know what I really need is, if you're going to be late, could you call me when you're on your way home? Because if you don't, I just get really anxious, right? It's not about what you should do or about who's right. Here's how I feel. Here's what would help me. If you're listening and you care about what I'm going through, then we'll get change. If it's an argument about who's right and who should do what, change is a lot less likely.
By the way, guys, if you're listening, Raffi has a book that he has provided a link for. Please check it out in the description.
Yeah, the book
So
goes a
if
lot through this whole communication process in detail with troubleshooting. So, for folks who are trying to communicate better and fix these problems, that's exactly what it's designed to do.
so let's say I'm on the other side, and now I've had this realization that okay, I go through this. There are two things that happen. One, there's a shock that whoa, I've been doing this, right? And now we have crossed the bridge. There's this awareness that's coming through. Firstly, how does one process this, right? How do they think about, I've been doing this really nasty thing to my partner? How should I look at myself? How should I process myself as this awareness is dawning on me?
For most people, I think we are not doing nasty things to our partner. Again, in these conversations with my wife where I was sure I was right and she was doing something wrong, it turns out she had a good reason or her
Yeah,
perspective made sense also.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So if you are, you're yelling at home and there's too much yelling and your partner says, "Look, you're angry all the time and I'm scared being around you and I'm always walking on eggshells." Okay, so the answer is not that you are a nasty person and you're rotten and you need to recognize that. If I stop and I get into your world and I say, "Hey, that must be really awful for you. I wouldn't want you to walk
yeah,
around on eggshells." And then I sort of look at myself and I say, "Hey, you know what? Here's what's going on for me. I just feel a lot of stress lately. The job is overwhelming. The kids are always upset. It's been really hard." So now if you empathize with me and you say, "I can understand why that would be hard. I understand why you're jumpy a lot of the time. Let's see if we can work to make this different." Nobody's a bad guy here. Neither of us is perfect.
yeah,
And I haven't been
yeah.
perfect. I
I,
do have to acknowledge that I haven't been perfect. If I think that I'm perfect and you're always wrong and I'm always right, we have a problem, right? That needs some reckoning. But to recognize that I haven't been perfect and maybe I've been louder and angrier than I need to be, but you care about why I got there and how I'm getting there. Again, we're working together in a relationship to make change, and it's great, and it's a connecting process. Yeah, I think that if we come from a perspective of help me understand, that is my key perspective in a marriage, and it's my three most important words in marriage. Forget I love you and forget I was wrong. Those are nice ideas, but help me understand is a perspective that really helps us get somewhere, because it means, you know what? You must have some explanation. You must have some story behind this, right? Again, unless you're married to a sociopath, everybody does what they do for some reason that makes sense to them,
yeah.
and it's important to understand that. Your partner probably has some reason why they are upset or why they are distant or whatever it is. And coming from a perspective of help me understand, like I really want to understand why you're experiencing and behaving the way you are, that really opens up a venue in the relationship to move forward instead of getting stuck in the same cycles, which people tend to do.
Now that I have understood this entire situation, how would you say someone goes about implementing the process? So they're trying to shift themselves and they're trying to become this new person. And I'm using this as a microcosm for any challenge that comes up, right? They want to shift themselves. There are two parts. One is the communication within themselves, and there's a communication with their partner. How do they communicate this process that they're trying to work through? What aspects do they need to focus on?
I think it depends where you're coming from. Starting from this understanding of I'm not perfect is important. Some people already have this problem of thinking that they're awful and terrible and have no strengths and everything's wrong with them. So I think it depends which end you're coming from. Everybody has strengths and everybody has weaknesses. Everybody does some things right and some things wrong. So getting this understanding that, you know what, I am who I am. I got here because I've been through things, right? There's a saying that everyone's doing the best they can with the tools they have. And I think that's true. People who had a difficult childhood are coming at it from a disadvantage as opposed to people who had a really positive childhood. And
Right.
people who have a certain personality or certain mental habits or issues. Okay, so we all have our struggles to face. And if we can say, you know what, I'm not a bad person because I've been through this experience or I have this challenge, let's just try to make it better from where it is. I think that helps. And if two people come from that perspective in a marriage, great, I'll tell you what's hurting me, but I'll also try to change myself. And you'll tell me what's hurting you, and you'll try to change yourself, and we'll get somewhere like that.
Now, just shifting gears a little bit, I know that there are I think when I was trying to learn more from you, you spoke about four aspects to listening, if I understood it right. What are the four aspects? And could you help us understand that more? Because that was very intriguing to me.
Yeah, let's dip back into that, right? The LOVE process, right?
Yeah.
Listening, reflecting in your own words. I had to fudge the RO there, but it works out. Own words is important. Validating and empathizing, right? Those are the only four things that you should be doing when you're on the listening side. Because sometimes people try to debate or they try to solve, right? This is a big man thing, right? When the woman comes with a problem, the man tries to solve it and make it go. We don't want solving. She does not want you to solve the problem. If she did, she'd tell you. What she wants is you to hear the problem and feel for her. And that's true for a lot of people, but this dynamic does happen a lot for, between men and women. So yeah, the listening process is just first I'm going to listen, meaning I'm not predicting what you're going to say, and I'm not looking at my phone. I'm just focusing on you, and I hear what's going on. And once I've heard it, I'm going to reflect back in my own words. And the own words is important because if you say, Raffi, I really don't like the way that you slam the door when you come home. So if I say, you really don't like the way I slam the door when I come home, it doesn't really sound like I'm listening. It sounds like I'm parroting back what you said, and I could be doing that while playing a video game.
Yeah.
So really what I have to do is change it into my own substance to say, oh, so it really bothers you when I come home and I slam the door loudly, right? It doesn't matter the exact words I use as long as I processed it and spit it back out through my own brain instead of just
Mhm.
bouncing it back and forth.
Yeah.
So I make sure I check in that what I'm thinking is what you're thinking, right? It's very easy
Yeah.
for you to say one thing and me to think you meant another.
Yeah.
So when I reflect back, I not only do I check in that I got what you said, but I convey to you that I got what you said. It's nice if I understand it. That's great. Maybe I do and maybe I don't. But if you don't know that I understand it, we're not going to get very far because we're still
Yeah.
thinking we're on different pages. So I'll reflect back so that we both know, yes, we are on the same page. Great. Then again, I validate. You know what? That makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, I should ask you, you know what? I'm not really clear. Why is it that when I open the window, you find that offensive? I'm not seeing it. Could you help me understand? See, there's help me understand again. I don't assume that you're an idiot or that makes no sense. You make some sense. You've gotten plenty far in the world, right? And everybody's partner, assumedly, has had a job or raises the kids or talks to their family. Like, very few people are married to completely incompetent people. So you have a brain, you've been somewhere, it probably makes sense on some level. Let me understand that part. And when I get there, I say, I see how that does make sense, right? Maybe because, in your culture, opening the window means this. Or maybe in your family, when you were a kid, when someone opened the window, that meant that whatever. Okay, there's some reason. When I get there, then I can say, oh, I get that. Yeah, that does stink. Yeah, right? I get why you're upset about that. And empathy just sounds like, well, I'm sorry, that stinks. Not, I'm sorry, like, I apologize for having offended you, right? I may not have done anything wrong. Opening the window is like a kind of a normal thing, right? I didn't mean to offend you, but I feel pain for your pain.
Yeah.
That is empathy. If you're hurting, then I'm hurting with you. I'm not
Yeah.
apologizing. I'm not trying to make it go away. I just want you to know that if you're in pain, I'm in pain with you. And that's what a relationship is. You didn't get married to solve problems. Hey, let's get married. Now, anytime I have a problem, I've got somebody to
Yeah.
fix. That wasn't it. You got married because you want to share your life with somebody. And what that means is if I'm having an experience internally that I can convey to you and you can be there with me, we are in relationship. Even if you're mad at me, even if we're in dispute, even if we don't agree on the facts, if you care about what I'm going through, we have a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, like I love the way you broke it down. And I think in a weird way, it's a process I've understood for a while, but I could never break it down the way you broke it down. So
Right,
that was super helpful.
honestly, it's not a hugely new concept.
Yeah.
Is reflecting and active listening. This is a little bit more than active listening, but yeah, I think what I've been able to do is just break it down into an easy to follow and memorable way. And again, in this book, I sort of lay out the steps, but also all the ways it goes wrong and all the reasons why this makes sense, and the arguments sometimes people have against it. So it's a helpful guide for people to try to notch up the communication in their relationship, improve their marriages. Yeah, and it's not always enough. It's not a replacement for couples counseling, but it certainly can be helpful for folks who really want to make their marriage better and aren't sure how to do it. There's a lot of bad advice out there, and my advice is good advice.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to zoom in on something that you mentioned in the four components, which is LOVE, which is empathy. What is the difference between empathy and sympathy,
Oh, I
especially
knew
when
you
you're
would
in a
ask that.
especially when you're in a marriage and you're with someone, you got to be careful. Maybe sympathy is needed sometimes. I'm not saying it's not needed, but you need to know when to use which one. So I wanted to kind of shed some light on what's the difference and when should you use each one.
Yeah, so I think again, language kind of creeps in, and I'm not sure that the way people use it is the way it was originally defined.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. And I think people have different ways of defining it. Here's how I use these terms. Empathy means if you're in pain, I'm in pain with you, right? I feel with you. Empathy means in feeling. I'm going to feel into your feeling,
Mm-hmm.
right? So sympathy is a little bit more removed. If your kid drops their lollipop, you may have sympathy, like, oh, it's a bummer. I'll get you a new one, or like, you don't really step in there most of the time because there's all kinds of things going on. They'll forget it in 2 minutes. No big deal. But sometimes, I mean, it's really important to be empathic with kids as well. And, they lost their favorite toy. They have five more of them, but they lost this one today. Or or they only have one flavor of this lollipop. To step in there means to stop for a moment and really say to them, wow, that really is sad. You really wanted that lollipop. Ugh. And just be sad with them for a moment. So it's sharing their emotion and sharing the pain. You get into the cave with them instead of just sort of peeking out like, oh yeah, that seems like a bad place to be. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
It's more connected, and it's really important to have that in a relationship because you want to be together in this, right? For me to acknowledge that you had a bad experience, acknowledging it is not quite the same thing as sharing in it. And that's
Yeah.
why we got married. Again, I didn't get married to have somebody witness my life. I got married to have somebody share in my life and participate in my life. And that's what empathy is.
I think this visual comes to mind for me where, if someone's deep in the hole, sympathy is probably you're looking from higher up in the hole and saying, okay, you're in the hole. But empathy is probably you're going
Right in there.
down there. You're right in there trying to understand and be there with them, supporting them to get out of it.
Sure, right. And I mean, you support them to get out at their pace. Sometimes people want to be where they are, right? If someone has a huge tragedy happen to them, a parent dies, you don't get in there and say, cheer up, it's going to be okay. You get in there and you're sad with them, and then
Yeah.
you can leave the hole and maybe they'll stay there. But the fact that you can go there is really helpful to them. And it's important
Yeah.
for you not to feel like you have to get stuck there, right? You need a
Yeah.
lifeline to the top level so you can pull yourself out. Being empathic with somebody does not mean that you get stuck there and you're also feeling stressed and worried all the time. It means you get in there and you feel with them, wow, this is stressful. Wow, it's really hard for you. And then you do go back to your normal life. It doesn't mean that you have to derail your life because somebody close to you is having trouble. You get in there with them, you share with them, you support them, but you also have your own stuff.
Yeah. This has been a lovely conversation, and thank you for giving us your time. I'm sure the audience would truly enjoy every bit of wisdom that they got from you.
Oh, I
And
got
I
so many
pers-
bits of wisdom, so many bits of wisdom.
yeah,
Thank you for the
and
opportunity.
I learned a lot from it. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity just to get the message out. I think that, communication is so important in a relationship and people can really learn to do it better. And it's
Yeah,
hard and it takes work, but there's
takes a
definitely a
lot of
path
work.
ahead. Yeah,
Yeah,
and so that's why I wrote the book, and I work with people every day trying to help them shore up their relationships. And it's the best thing in the world to have a solid marriage, a solid relationship. So I hope that I'm helping in some way, and I appreciate the platform to be able to share it with people.
yeah. Guys, today we've gone into a lot of depth with gaslighting and especially communication issues and certain tools you can use in your relationships and marriage. If you've enjoyed this, make sure to watch it again if you want and share it with others. Thank you, Raffi, and we really appreciate
Thanks for having me.
everything we learned.